We are right at 7 o'clock, so we are certainly going to be punctual and get this party started. And my name is Jamie Peterson. I serve on the executive board for CTAM. I fulfill the role of treasurer, which I absolutely love. I'm really excited to be here tonight, especially with tonight's instructor, especially with the subject matter we're going to be talking about. This is very near and dear to my heart, and I think all theaters are going to be embracing technology more and more, even when the pandemic finally draws to a close. So joining us tonight is our instructor, Peggy Mead-Finizio. Peggy is an active lighting designer, technical theater instructor, choreographer, dance instructor, and arts administrator. She holds an MFA degree in theater arts and choreography from the University of Iowa and is currently an assistant professor in the theater department at Saginaw Valley State University. She designs lighting for many of the SVSU mainstage productions, serves as a department production manager, and is a mentor to student designers and technicians. She's also a faculty mentor for the SVSU Studio XP student, directed and designed Black Box Performance Series. She was also integral in the Great Lakes Bay Regional Theater Alliance production of Mamma Mia and the Flint Institute of Music Faculty Music Concert Series. She has served as the assistant lighting designer to designer Ted Sullivan for the Juilliard Spring Dance Concerts for the last several years. And her most recent design was for the SVSU mainstage production of Number 6, directed by none other than Tommy Wedge. So I'd like to welcome Peggy, and I won't take up any more of your time. I want to remind everyone that as we're going through the webinar tonight, if you do happen to have questions, please post those questions to the chat. We're going to be filing through those questions. Sometimes we'll type in an answer. Sometimes we'll direct it right to Peggy. We'll try to make sure that all of your questions are answered before the session ends this evening.
And I'm going to put my email address in the chat real quick here. I meant to do that earlier. And I put a little welcome there. All right, well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here with you. And one of the things when I was talking to JR about this session was coming at use of multimedia in theater can be really high end and it can be really low tech. So I tried to cover a little bit of everything as we go. Since we only have an hour, I sort of picked some things that I thought would be most useful, but of course this 1 hour is not going to be in total everything we could talk about. So if you do have any questions or you end up with wanting to share something with me at another time, my email address is in the chat. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. And start our PowerPoint. All right, so can I confirm that everybody can see the PowerPoint? Is that a true story?
Correct.
Yay. Okay. I always like to confirm because sometimes I get yapping on and people are like, are we supposed to be seeing something? Yes. Okay. So my first experiences with using multimedia was with a machine similar to the one in the picture. Many of you probably are familiar with the slide projector. And there were lots of fun uses of the slide projector that were used at a theater I worked at for a great deal of time back in the day. I worked at Flint Youth Theater for over 25 years. And many of the directors there like to use projections of sort. And we used a lot of slides. And I can honestly say that I'm glad that we're not in that technology right now because they would get jammed and sometimes burn. And anybody who's used a slide projector, you know the whole story. So that's kind of where some of our multimedia started. But now if we look at things that have either recently been on Broadway or recently closed, you can see that we have Dear Evan Hansen, Be More Chill, Anastasia, Beetlejuice are the ones that I brought up with. I don't know if anybody got to see video clips or got to see Beetlejuice at all, but the lighting designer and the projection designer worked very closely, and they projection mapped even down to the molding on the doorways. So there were things going on in the projections with that, and use of music, the lighting, music, and projections all timed in the same program. So it's very interesting. So just a couple of examples from Broadway here that we have. So the first thing I want to talk about when you think about going to do any sort of multimedia is thinking about intellectual property, because usually there is some form of content within multimedia that you want to share that might be somebody else's intellectual property. So I put a definition for intellectual property up from Oxford Languages, and it's just something that we need to think about ethically and legally as we go forward. If you Google, if you're a fan of Beyonce, I don't mean to crush your dreams or anything, but if you Google Beyonce and plagiarism, she's one of the most prolific plagiarists in our culture today with things that she has borrowed, if you will. And I think it's really interesting too, because her choreographer, her main choreographer, wants to copyright his dance moves, which copyright dance right now, it's very vague, but I think it's funny that a plagiarist would want to copyright their moves. So there's a whole conversation and session just in that. So if you're looking for content and you're thinking, well, I don't have a really large budget, but I really want to use some content that I can use that isn't someone else's intellectual property, or I won't get in trouble. Like any picture of Mickey Mouse you want to stay away from, right? But just to point out that there's a difference between free with images, videos, sound, and royalty free. So something that's royalty free, you might pay a fee for a one-time use or that type of thing. Whereas something that's free, obviously we all know what free is. We've heard that commercial, it's free, right, for that tax software. But just to point out that that can be an issue, because you might think, oh, it's royalty free, oh, but it's not free. Sometimes royalty free things are very expensive. So there's this really cool website that I want to share with you, and I've just learned how to toggle between my screens. So I'm going to bring up the link here, and oh, no, thank you for your patience. Can I confirm you can see the website?
Yep.
Yay. Okay, is anybody familiar with the Creative Commons? Okay, so the cool part about Creative Commons is it is a place where people go to share things that they would like people to be able to use. So let's say you needed pictures of dogs. I need pictures of dogs. So there are some pictures of dogs. So they have different licensing options here. That they have code here, and you can select pictures based on those codes. And some of them are free to use in any way. Some of them are free to use if you give credit and that type of thing. But you could do your whole show about dogs just by going to the Creative Commons. And they have video clips, they have sound, they have new, what's the word I want? New audio things. And so it's a really wonderful site to find content that you can feel confident in as you go. Okay, now I'm going to toggle back to the, yay, I did it. Toggled back to our thing. So just something to be thinking about. Now, I have a handout that will be sent out to everyone that has a whole bunch of links on it for sound and music and images and video and different ideas about use of projections. And so that resource will be coming out to you at the end of the conference. Okay, so let's click on there. There we go. Okay, so in terms of thinking about sound as you're dealing with music and sound effects, there's lots of different things to consider, and the royalties to sound are something for music are something to be considered. I'm going to also share this PowerPoint with you, and I've shared each one of these logos is a link to the different, we'll go to BMI here. Let me toggle to BMI. There we go. So you can upload or publish your own, or you can get licensing from music that BMI covers. And it's just a really good way. And so some of your institutions might already pay for an ASCAP and BMI license, which is really handy. And I just wanted to point that out, that there are places to go to get those royalties. I was working on a dance concert that's going up in June. And one of the choreographers that's putting his piece together used a piece of music that he thought was royalty free, but that ended up being $1,000 per curtain rise to play the 4-minute piece of music. So he chose some other music. So you never know what you're going to encounter with that, but just pointing that out to everybody. Okay, so a couple of things to share with us about use of software for either editing sound effects or content delivery. Let me go back to being able to see people here. One moment. There we go. Are there people familiar with any of these vendors that you see on the screen? Super familiar?
Yes, quite a lot.
Quite a lot of them? Okay, great. Some people are nodding, some people are shaking heads. Okay, so one of the things that I love about sound editing itself, like let's say I have this great bell that I want to ring 5 times, but I only have the sound effect and it rings twice and I want to make it ring 5 times. Audacity is a great tool to use. If I go to their website, it's very easy. It's multi-platform, cross-platform, and this is what it looks like. And there are lots of effects that you can add onto the layers of your sound. You can put multiple clips together and do lots of things. And then you can export it as many different kinds of files. So let's say I had the bells that I wanted, and I was using another piece of software or a computer that would only take .wav files. Audacity allows you to export your project as a .wav file. Usually using an MP3 is it's a very compressed sound file and is not going to have the best quality. So it's better to stick with a .wav or .aiff file to keep the sound quality better for your sounds. One of the things that I like the most about Audacity is that it's free and it's open software that's cross-platform, and it's not too difficult to use. There are many on YouTube, there are many tutorials. I kind of went in and taught myself. I had worked with a program called Sony SoundForge before, and it's a lot like SoundForge. Now, if you wanted to have something on a more complicated end, you can subscribe to the Creative Cloud and use Adobe Audition, and it looks very similar to Audacity, but it has a lot more bells and whistles. And then on the higher end, if you were working on a production and you needed not only to deliver the sound effects and music content, but you actually wanted to create some compositions, Ableton is one of the the best go-to programs for that. And I was sharing with JR just before our session that with Ableton Live, you can use something that's called a launch pad. Novation is a really good brand for the launch pads, and I love the vendor Sweetwater. Some of you may be really familiar with Sweetwater. And the thing that is really wonderful about the launch pad is with it connected to Ableton, you can be your own DJ, and it comes with pre-programmed sound effects. So you could, make it sound like you're in a disco all of a sudden just by pushing the orange and then blue and then pink. Or you can put your own sound effects into each key on the touchpad and use it for whatever type of thing that you would like. So for example, we did a production at SVSU of A Doll's House, and Tommy Wedge directed that. And we set it in a 1950s TV studio. So it was like filmed like, or streamed like it was a 1950s television show. So we had laugh tracks and groans and other types of sound effects. And just by touching each key, the person running the touchpad was able to bring those sound effects up without the stage manager having to call cues. Of course, the stage manager could call those cues, but it was a really wonderful tool to use for those sound effects. Now, if you're familiar with QLab, the challenge with QLab is that it's a Mac-only product. Right now, it continues to be free to download and use with limitations. They were very generous about how they share that, but the fee-based version has really a lot of bells and whistles, and QLab's going to come up a whole bunch of times tonight, because you can run sound with QLab, you can run lights with depending on which version of QLab you have, you can run lights with it, and you can run projections. There is a program called Multiplay on a website called Dasher, and it runs similarly to QLab. It's a time code based program, and it's free to download and use. I have not had experiences with it, but it says that it's multi-platform, so it would be good on a PC as well as Mac. So it is, oops, I went ahead. I went too far forward. So on the handout that you're going to be receiving, I have 3 different websites that I recommend looking at. One is for the 9 royalty-free music sites that might help make a perfect video soundtrack, but I've found that type of music is really good if you're trying to do an underscore for your show. Sometimes music that is labeled for video soundtracks, sometimes it sounds a little bit like video games, but sometimes it can really be emotional and thought-provoking. And then I have an article for you about the 10 free best audio editors in the event that are totally free. So in the event Audacity doesn't work for you, there are a whole bunch of other ones available. And then I also have sound effects, a royalty-free sound effects website for you. Okay, so speaking of sound effects, we found trying to use a cell phone on stage being a challenge in a show that I worked on, and we ended up using WhatsApp that's now known and that's now owned by Facebook. It wasn't at the time, but it is now, to use Wi-Fi to make the phone call on stage. It used to be that the actor might have to have a receiver and speaker in their garments, or that you could place a hidden speaker near where they were going to stand, so it would sound like the phone was ringing near them. But with the technology of Wi-Fi, that would require you to be able to rely on your Wi-Fi. So you want to make sure that that is something. But we found that the WhatsApp worked really well. When we tried doing just the cell phones with cell phone service we had a 9 or a 7 to 9 second delay, and we could never get the stage manager to call the cell phones at the right time. So I highly recommend the WhatsApp, call your cell phones. So things that to consider about using your sound effects sort of makes sense. And we can pull sounds from YouTube, and then I just put, but should you, because can I advocate for that with the legality and royalties on all of that? There are a lot of different programs you can use to rip sound off of YouTube. And that's not like, I'm not trying to be, what's the word I want? Cute. The word rip is like if I was ripping a record or ripping a CD, that's just what it's called. But just putting that out there. One of the things that I have found with speaker placement and can really be helpful with those sound effects. So just layering that out there. We talked a little bit about the delivery with QLab. Okay, so are there any questions at this point? Are we doing okay at this point?
Looks good on this side.
Okay, great.
Have any questions in the chat just yet?
Okay, great. All right, so things looking at projections. How many people in our group have used projections in their spaces before?
I have used them.
Yeah, go ahead.
We just used 3 screens, projection for Jerry's brain,
That's right.
backlit, and we were using live cameras on 2 of those screens for the actors to interact with what was going on stage. We also played in the center stage. On that screen, we used, we did videos, we did live feed from a cell phone camera onto that screen. So we used a lot of projection in our last show.
That's excellent. That's excellent. So, and you brought up quite a few of the topics that people need to consider when dealing with projections. There was an updated version of West Side Story that was recently on Broadway. And one of the things that they did in that production was they had large screens on stage, and some of the action was taking place in other parts of the building of the theater and then being broadcast onto the screen while other actors were on stage. And I just think it's a really interesting idea, and something that, and as you were describing, the different uses of the camera or projector placement or all of those types of things. So it's kind of a new and novel thing, very exciting. Okay, so some of you might be familiar with watermarking on images, and just putting that out there, I forever am asking my students, please don't use watermarked images on your presentations, and then I still get this, but just wanted to bring it up that just means that this organization owns the rights to that image and you can purchase it from them. But just wanted to point that out if you had never had that experience or seen that. So I have a little anecdote to share with you. There was a production that I worked on at SVSU a couple of years ago that was a children's version of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. And the director wanted, and I don't know how many of you have seen the Disney version, probably most of us. And at the time where the Ichabod is interacting with the Headless Horseman, there's this flaming pumpkin that is animated. It comes down this bridge and it comes right out the screen, and the jump factor. And the director really wanted that to happen. We had we did the interaction with the Headless Horseman in black light, and then he wanted the projection to be on the screen and have the Headless Horseman throw the pumpkin and then have this pumpkin blare. And he said, okay, well, we'll just use the clip from the Disney film. And I said, I don't know how I feel about that. Disney is probably one of the hardest to get around any sort of fair use examples. I mean, if we were using the flaming pumpkin head in a version of the Nutcracker, maybe we could use it for fair use. But using it in the Legend of Sleepy Hollow for the pumpkin, that was the pumpkin head. So I did an extensive internet search and found several videos of a flaming pumpkin head being thrown toward a camera. And we ended up with one that was similar, but not, and sort of a nod to that one. But I had to do a lot of convincing with the director on the fact that we could do his vision without causing ourselves some complications with Disney. Now, I don't know that anybody from the Disney Corporation would come and sit at SVSU and go, "You used our pumpkin, don't." But I've known people who've gotten a cease and desist order from Disney, so you know, why chance it? So it's something that sometimes you have to negotiate with your director as you're working. And as I guess I found my best advice is when I found something that was similar or a nod to the original, it ended up working actually better because the pumpkin in the video we found looked more like the pumpkin that was actually on stage. So that worked out okay. But just a little anecdote about that. Okay, so on the handout that I'm going to be, that you're going to be getting, there is a wonderful series of articles about projections by a man named Matt Kaiser. And he has a 4-part series about the use of projections that covers kind of everything that's on this list and breaks it down. He's got some video examples. So that link will be available for you. But the surface to project on is something to really consider. So on my screen, all of your heads are covering up my quick tip. Oh, I went too far. Oops, let me do that. My quick tip. But I worked on a production back in the day where we couldn't afford to do anything, but there needed to be projections in the windows on this box set. So we ended up going and buying a fairly clear, somewhat hazy, but not totally clear, not totally white plastic shower curtain, and steamed the wrinkles out of it and taped it into the, or stapled it into the window, and it worked as beautifully as if we had purchased rear projection screen. Okay, maybe not as beautifully, but similarly. And it was, you know, it was like $4 a window, and we were able to do it. So the biggest thing to think about is the surface that you're projecting on. How much reflection does it have back at you? What color is it? And are you able to go from the front or the rear? At the end of this PowerPoint, I don't know if we'll get all the way there, but I have a beautiful video from a Stratford Festival's production of Coriolanus, and they did the entire, most of the scenery was projected. And it was, when I say it was a life-changing theater experience, I know that sounds kind of heady, like, oh, that theater production changed my life, but that theater production changed my life. But they had infrared technology that would allow the actors to walk in front of the projection, and the projection knew, oh, that is a human form. Don't put the projection on them. We don't all have the technology that Stratford has. So sometimes your projector placement has to take into consideration where the actors are going to go. Most people are going to say something up high or a rear projection is going to be your best, as long as your actors understand they can't walk behind the projection surface between the projector beam and the projection surface. I know that sounds like common sense, but when the actors are wandering around backstage, sometimes it's a challenge, I know. So with dealing with your projector, knowing the type of projector you're having, the kind of lens, is it a short throw lens, is it a far throw lens, and how many lumens you've got going on there. Now, in Oh, no, it's not this slide. I want to go here. If we look at the, I'll go back to the other slide in just a second. If we look at the quick fact about lumens, so a lumen is the amount of illumination, it's a measurement of illumination from a light source. And if we look at the average flashlight, although I'm sure you could find some that were brighter than this, but you know, your average, get it at the drugstore flashlight, it's going to be about 100 lumens. A little teeny tiny handheld projector might be about 1,000. But if you have a lighting rig full of elliptical reflector spotlights, and you're running them really brightly, they're pumping out about 13,000 lumens. If you have a one little wimpy projector that's only 3,000 lumens, you know that you've got a problem there because you're not going to be able to see your projection. The average movie theater projector is about 20,000 lumens. So thinking about how bright your projector is really important. Now, I've worked on shows where someone took several Pico projectors and they used them as handheld props and projected the images onto actors' costumes. They had white or light gray costumes and used the actors as a projection surface with these small handheld Pico projectors. Some of them are a little finicky, and if they're connected to Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, sometimes that can be a little finicky if you are dealing with that, wanting to deal with that. But if you get the right small projector with enough lumens coming out of it, those small projectors can be really, really quite effective as a prop or as a having projections on a person, which I think is really kind of cool. Okay, I'm gonna go back 2 slides here. Now, if you're using more than one projector, you have to consider how things are connected up. And there is a product called a triple head to go that can sort of be like a surge protector type thing for your projectors. And then if you're using more than one projector to make a larger image, the projectors will allow you to edge blend. And there are different media servers that can help you with this, which we'll talk about in a second. The last United States Institute for Theater Technology conference that I went to, they had a 30-foot wall and had 7 projectors all edge blended to make sort of an interactive display with projections. And it was really, really quite amazing. So there's lots of things that you can do with more than one projector. Now, sometimes if you have a projector that is, let's say you have a 300 lumen projector, sometimes doubling up the projectors can help you. Some theaters do that just as a safety, so that if one projector goes down, the other projector's there, just like Kristen Chenoweth wearing 7 microphones in her hairdo during Hairspray Live on TV. In case one of her microphones went down, she had 7 in the hairdo, which is pretty amazing that her head didn't pull her over because she's so small. Okay, so a couple of things about image editing and video editing. I wanted to provide for you some free types of products, as well as some that are more paid for. Blender is a really, it's a 3D modeling software as well as a video editing software. And it once you get the hang of it, it's really a lot of fun and it's free. Now, the challenge is your computer has to have enough oomph in the graphics card to be able to handle everything that you're trying to do. And that's going to be true for any time that you're dealing with your projections and technology. On the handout that I have alternatives for any of these pay services that I have on here. So I have some Photoshop alternatives for you, stock photo alternatives, stock video alternatives, and that type of thing. Is anybody familiar with or have used some of the products on the screen? Some people, nobody
Yeah,
shaking.
Experience with iMovie. I've used a little bit of Adobe Premiere for our
Okay.
robotics team. I haven't used the blender yet.
Okay. Well, you know, it's one of those things where on YouTube, anything you want to do is there's probably a how-to video on YouTube, and there are quite a few good videos on YouTube about Blender, but also there's a really good forum in Blender. I have the benefit at SVSU to be able to have the Creative Cloud free, which is like such an amazing thing with Adobe, and students can get it at a discount. But I think some of these free products are as exciting or user-friendly. Now, let me just go to this 1 second here. Here we go. Photopea is looks almost, I mean, they've made it look just like Photoshop. The challenge with Photopea on the free version is you can see that this ad bar is just like going crazy. And if that kind of thing drives you nuts, then spending very much time on Photopea to edit images is going to be really annoying. But if you can tune that out, Photopea is as robust as Photoshop to getting your job done. And you are able to use lots of different file types, as well as import and export different file types. So playing around in this, what I tell students is playing around in this program for image editing can be really handy in letting you know if it is worth it for you to invest in the Creative Cloud to bump yourself up to the next bells and whistles with Photoshop.
Peggy, could you give us some examples of maybe times that you've used these editing programs
Yes.
and how you applied it in a specific show?
Yes, I definitely can. So let me go back to my PowerPoint here.
Can I say too that I've used this program for prop making?
Yes, that's where I was just going to go.
Mhm.
We did a production of a play called Cripple of Inishmaan, but by Martin McDonough. And most of the play, well, a third of the play, maybe half of the play, takes place in this little store in Ireland in, I think it's in the 40s. I might be wrong. No, it might be earlier in time. But anyway, not today. So our props person did a lot of research on what products might have been in the store. And the script asked for certain products to be on the shelves. So our props person took a bunch of discounted expired green beans that she got almost free and took all the labels off and then printed up using Photoshop, printed up the labels and installed them on, and then distressed them with spray paint to make it look as aged as the store, so they weren't brand spanking new. And you know, saying, hey, we printed this on a laser printer or whatever type of thing. And it was really convincing. There were several products, the cans needed to be wrapped. There were several products that were in boxes. And then she even was able to do a little thing where she printed on fabric. There's a section in the play where there is someone beaten. It's a happy little play, beaten. And there's this blood splatter, and she was able to print on fabric to help us with that moment of the blood splatter. And all of it was done with Photoshop. Now we have a large format printer, but you wouldn't really need, because we can print up to 36 inches wide, but you wouldn't necessarily need that big of a printer. If you can print on legal size paper and plan ahead, you can map things and tape things together. I'm trying to think of another example from props that technology was helpful for. In that same production, we used Blender for, there was a film they're supposed to be watching, and they give you the film content when you buy the script, but it's really rough and raw on both ends of the clip that you get. And so we ended up editing it a bit and adding a commercial in. And so using, we could have done it in any of these, but we ended up using Blender, and that worked out well. In a production that we did of She Kills Monsters, we worked with a student in the art department, and she created images in Photoshop that were then animated in After Effects. In that production, there's a dragon with 5 heads. And so part of the storytelling in She Kills Monsters is the main character, her sister is killed suddenly, and she actually ends up going into a Dungeons and Dragons game to follow some clues her sister left her, and finds out more about her sister in this Dungeons and Dragons game. So it's constantly bouncing back and forth between her high school and the Dungeons and Dragons game. And so for the animation portion of the storytelling about the car accident that her parents were killed in, and then how her sister was killed, that was all done by this art student using Photoshop and then being animated with After Effects. On the handout I have a couple of Photoshop alternatives like the one I showed you, as well as some for After Effects. I've used After Effects just a bit, but in our production of, I'm gonna move forward here just a second so to show you, oops, I went too far. There we go. In our production of The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, the floor was gridded out in 4x4 squares, and we had LED tape running to make a grid, and then the grid continued up onto the projection surface. So we happened to have to give line set 6 up to this projection screen. That we don't have access to that line set, and the one in front of it and the one behind it, because that screen is always there. So we embrace the fact that this screen is always there, because our theater is used for presentations and meetings and classes. So that screen becomes something that many, many people use. So we ended up incorporating the screen into the set. So the set went up at an angle on a rake into the screen, and things that were happening with the lights on the floor were then mirrored up on the screen. And then other things also, as you can see in this picture with the water scene, other things were also happening there. But all of the things, all of the animations were done in After Effects. And it was really quite clever. At one point, when the main character, Christopher, is walking through London trying to find his mother, there was a game of Tetris on the back, and things were fitting together as a puzzle, as because the main character is on the spectrum. So the goal of the tech in the play and parts of the play is to put the audience in the mind of that autistic or person on the spectrum. Now, the biggest challenge I had with this, well, first, let me tell you how the projection was done. So there are 6 projectors making this projection surface. The projection surface is 30 feet wide, and I want to say 24 feet tall, but I might be wrong on those dimensions, those exact dimensions. And we did not have very bright projectors. So it is in thirds behind the actors, and there are 2 projectors per third. And the projection designer made a template that he used to align each of the projectors each night. And then the content was delivered with QLab. So each of the projection cues was just a hit of the space bar on a computer once they were loaded into QLab. Now, as the lighting designer of this production, I had a huge challenge, and that was one of the things on our list of things to consider, because there were times when the actors stood right up against the screen. But if I had the front light on the actors while they were standing right up against the screen, then you wouldn't be able to see the projection because of the lumen situation we talked about earlier. So what I had to do as the lighting designer is come in with the front light at a really, really steep angle. And it acted more as a front down. And then I got some side light in there to give them some more dimension. But you can see that the screen isn't blasted out from the front light. There were a couple of points in the production where spotlights were used and the actors in the spotlights were kind of blaring out the screen, but the director, Tommy Wedge did the direction for that. I guess I've lit a lot of shows for Tommy. The director was fine for those brief moments when the spotlights were on, having those moments happen. Now, I will tell you that we did have some technical glitches with this show. One of them was we had 3 snow days during Tech Week. So we ended up, our first show in front of an audience was the first time we had run all the tech. And because the projection designer, Andy, was very, very organized, and I guess I was organized with the lights. I don't know. The actors, you can see the actors. We'll just go there. You can see them. But we did run into some snags. And if we had had some big technical difficulties with those projections, it would have been a problem. But I guess the technical gods were with us a little bit on that one. Okay, I'm going to go back for just a second here. I have, just as not necessarily as a plug for Movavi, but I own 2 or 3 Movavi products that I really like. I have one that is specifically a converter for types of files. So if I have an MP4 and I need it to be a different kind of file, because some video editing programs don't like the MP4s, they want the .movs, that type of thing. So if you need a product that is going to help you convert different kinds of files, like you only have these MP3s and you need them to be waves, or if you're using music that you purchased out of iTunes from Apple, they make their audio files MP4As and it's proprietary. They don't want you to mess around with the files that you bought from them. And so, don't tell them, but I use my Movavi converter to make them WAV files so that I can fool around with them, but don't tell anybody about that. So I would highly recommend them. If you just Googled converters, you're going to get a whole bunch of different ones that pop up. And I will tell you that some of them will tell you on all of these products, they will tell you free trial. Well, what they mean by free trial in some of the video, some of the sound, and some of the image editing software is free trial means you can play around with it, but you cannot export it and use it. So even if it tells you 10-day free trial, before you start digging and putting all your time into starting to develop something in that program, make sure it's something that either will not have their watermark on it, or is something that you can actually get the time you spent in it out of it by being able to export it. Because I've learned the hard way on several products and been so disappointed. But I would highly recommend the Movavi products. And they are cross-platform. You can do, or not cross-platform, but they have Windows and they have Mac on their products.
Peggy, there was a question that came across inquiring about using some of these design programs and then printing on fabric. Have
Yeah.
you had any experience doing that or any suggestions?
Yes, so there are a couple of different things that you can do. One of the easiest ways is if your printer will accept, what's the word I want? The transfer paper, that is one way to make it happen. And it just kind of depends on what kind of printer you have. We have a printer that takes multiple types of things. We can print on very thin fabrics. We can print on like a rayon or a linen. If I wanted to print on denim, my printer won't take the denim. But the challenge is with printing on fabric is scale. So I don't know if you've ever had this experience just printing out a Word document, right? Or something from your printer. You print it out, oh, it's not the size you thought it was going to be. If you take that ×5 with printing on fabric and making sure that the calculations are correct as you print. I went to a choreography conference that had technicians and dancers and choreographers sort of all there to collaborate. And one of the artists that was there, that was his main area of focus, was designing fabrics and printing his own fabrics. And some of the, one of the things he said was some of the inks that you can use for printing on fabric can be, people's skin can react to them. So that's something to be aware of for if you're doing printing on fabric for costuming, because that was his main focus, was costuming. That's about my extent of my knowledge about that. So it's not a huge amount. I do have a friend, I can Google her really quick. I do have a friend, or I'll use my phone, who wrote a book about making your own textiles. Let me just Google her really quick. Oh, and it's not coming up. Okay, I'll do that toward the end because I could recommend her book because it's an excellent book about developing and creating your own fabric. And there is a company called Spoonflower that will print on fabric for you anything that you design. So if you don't have the technology with which to do it, you can go to Spoonflower. They're also a wonderful vendor for unusual types of fabric. So that is a wonderful resource. I hope I touched on that question okay. Okay. All right. Okay, so the cheapest and easiest way to do projections, which is a little bit probably something a lot of people have already done within the pandemic, is to use PowerPoint to create your content. So I just created this slide using different animations and transitions and connecting your computer to the projector with HDMI. HDMI is a cable that will conduct sound and video or image. So if you are dealing with a VGA connection or any other connection than HDMI, then you'll have to have an additional audio connection. So HDMI is becoming more popular. It depends on the age of your projector as to whether it will connect through HDMI. Most computers now come with an HDMI connector, as I just said here. And the best part with your PowerPoint is you only need one person to push the space bar. Now with QLab that we were talking about earlier, if you have paid for QLab 4, you can run lights projections, and sound all in one cue stack, one person to push the go. So it's a one-man show. The thing that QLab does that's pretty sweet is you can buy QLab for just one day, or you can buy QLab for a week. You can buy it for just the amount of time you need it, or you can purchase it for your theater. So if you wanted to test it out and play around with it, you can and have more bells and whistles than just the free version of it. So that's a pretty easy way also to do the projections. But if you're going to run video content from your PowerPoint, you need to have a video player, such as VCL Media Player or QuickTimer. There are lots of them out there. So that is a quick and easy way to do projections. Now, if we get more complicated into content delivery, let's say you have this amazing donor that said to you, oh, don't you want an LED wall for your theater that's as big as your proscenium? And you said, why, of course I want an LED wall as big as my proscenium. Having a media server is going to be something that you would need to push content to that LED wall. Now, probably the easiest and cheapest media server is something that's called Isadora. And Isadora was developed by a Swedish company. I believe they're Swedish. And if you can imagine it, you can do it with Isadora. We did a production, a Theater for Young Audiences piece called Joan the Girl of Arc this last season in February. And there were these large, and by large, I mean 12-foot, 16-foot big lilies hanging that were projection surfaces. They were made out of cardboard and painted. And I choreographed some movement that was, we used Isadora to do live capture with the movement. And then I had a student who took that movement and made the movement from the dancer into a sphere. And then the movement that the dancer had done became the movement that the sphere did. And those became the voices of the saints that Joan of Arc heard, and they traveled in these flowers. So there was a lot of math that had to go into Isadora. It's pretty user-friendly and uses, I don't remember what they're called, but basically packets of data that are connected on the screen. So it's a software that's doing a lot of the connections, but there is a lot you can do, especially with the live capture. You can, if you have an actor on stage and you're projecting that actor's movement or action, you can modify what it looks like on a surface, and it would be in real time. That's one of the things it was invented for, but it does much more than that. It's around $1,700 depending on how many computers you're going to buy it for, and it depends on how the euro is doing as to how much it really costs. When I wanted to buy it, it was around $1,400, and then when we actually bought it, it was around $1,700. The euro, the exchange rate was different.
Peggy?
Yeah.
We're approaching the 8
yes.
o'clock hour, and
Okay.
I really enjoyed some of the discussion that you had about incorporating the projection into the show. I apologize. The dog in midnight.
Yeah, curious incident. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and just looking at some of our participants here in tonight's workshop, I know that a good number of them come from smaller venue theaters. You know, where they would probably love to have a large LED donated
I know,
wall.
right? Wouldn't that be amazing?
But quite honestly, probably don't have the infrastructure to manage that. Would it be possible to hit on a couple of points that would be more applicable to the smaller theaters?
Sure. So with something like, let's say you had QLab and you purchased QLab for, I want to say, oh, I don't remember here. I can look it up really quick how much QLab costs. Actually, okay, so I'll do that in just a second. But we did a production of, oh, what was the name of the show? It was about a man who went to the South Pole. Terra Nova. It's a play called Terra Nova. And it takes place in the North or in the South Pole. And then there are memories. So one of the things that the director really wanted to get across was it was based on the true a true life story. The person was real from the story. So the director really wanted these archival images that had been taken during the time of the voyage to be projected pre-show, intermission, and post-show. There was no surface that was really good to project on except these really randomly shaped iceberg type things that the scenic designer had designed. And they were quite large. They were a nice projection surface, but it would have looked weird to have a rectangle. So with QLab, there is a little bit of pixel mapping, not pixel mapping, I'm sorry, projection mapping that you can do. So I took the projections and mapped them to the shapes of these icebergs. And I was able to use the projections in a way that suited the environment on the set. And I think that is one of the things that's the greatest about QLab is it offers you flexibility in, yes, I could just present something that's a rectangle, or I can present something that's 5 rectangles because you can make multiple screens. When we did 9 to 5, I had multiple, I made multiple screens within QLab and had different content going to each screen. So it looked like a busy, for the opening number, looked like a busy day. And then these alarm clocks appeared on each screen. So on one big screen, I had divided up kind of like the Brady Bunch or a Zoom call, if you will. So that's one of the ways. Now, if you're using a projector and just using something like PowerPoint or Keynote, your animations and your transitions are going to be the things that's going to help you in those cases. In those cases, for sure. Other questions about that, or ways that I can point to things that might help you?
I like the explanation, you know, when you're talking about mapping. Okay.
Yeah.
That's really just structuring your image so you are not bleeding that image over in places that you don't want it to appear.
That is correct. And in this PowerPoint, we don't have time to look at this video. It is a video that is an advertisement for somebody's product, which it's a business that does this and they want you to hire them for your fashion show, which we're not, but it talks about what projection mapping is and gives lots of examples. An industry that is probably the biggest user of projection mapping is the auto industry. Car shows and automobile manufacturers are notorious for wanting to showcase their product in the best way. And I think some of the projection mapping ability we have now for theater or for live events comes from the need for a sneaker to be sold or for a car to be sold. It's as simple as taking if you've ever resized an image in Word, you put your image on the page and you wanted to make it smaller or larger. If you imagine those handles on each of those corners being something that you could move and change the shape of the projection, that's kind of how projection mapping works. There is a video in the Stratford Festival that goes over that information I talked about, that production I talked about Coriolanus, but this one that is about what projection mapping is, shows different applications of it. I worked on a project in graduate school where we had an air sensor that would detect your movement, and we created a game of pool from a projector coming down, and you would tap the surface and the balls would move. So projection mapping can also be interactive. And you will see that coming up in theater. I went to a presentation, and I can't tell you exactly how the technology worked, but it was how to projection map a costume onto an actor. And there was a piece of, they were using a gaming platform that allowed a 3D image of the actor to be inside the computer, so that the camera, when it followed the actor, the projection would also follow the actor. And it was quite amazing. It's, if you go to YouTube and Google around projection mapping on costumes, sometimes you can find some really interesting things there. That, of course, assumes you have all of that technology, right?
If I can interject just a moment,
Yeah.
you know, we are talking about some pretty high-end ideas, some higher end software and hardware, but in actuality, you know, dipping your toes into on-stage projection is not, it doesn't have to be a terribly expensive affair. Recently, we had some very good success with shopping the secondhand market. If you take some time, you can find and do a little bit of research on the hardware that's available. Our theater was able to pick up a couple of NEC projectors.
Nice.
We picked up a PA 550 model, which is a 5500 lumen projector. Now, what's unique about these projectors is they are stackable, and they are designed where your lenses can centrally focus, so you can combine up to four projectors to create a high intensity image, almost movie theater quality. But they're very lightweight. They're not very, you know, they're not very large, and they have number of lens options. We picked up a couple of them. The most I paid was about $240.
Which is really amazing, because if you went to buy that new, you know, I was doing some research on 6,000 lumen projectors about a month ago, and they're running between $1,700 and $2,000, $1,700, $2,000.
Oh yeah, that would be a good deal. And the only thing, you know, as a consumer, if you're looking in that secondhand market, you know, you really want to look at your lamp hours. You want to make sure that, you know, you're purchasing from, probably someone who deals in these projectors or the hardware. You can find a good deal out there, so you can dip your toes in without burning your budget for your show. Like I said, you know, we got a couple of them for under $500 for those two. Each of them had less than 400 lamp hours. And a lot of projectors nowadays, you're looking at about maybe 3,000 or more lamp hours. So that's a lot of shows that you can produce with that piece of equipment before you have to replace anything.
Well, and sometimes you want to look at the replacement cost of the lamp, because sometimes the lamp will be more expensive than the price you paid for the projector, you know,
Exactly.
in the end. So that's a really good point. We inherited some equipment from a theater. We have an alumni that works at the Katharine Hepburn Center in Connecticut. And so they were upgrading to laser projectors and some other things. And we inherited some things. And sometimes that secondhand market, or sometimes it can be from an upgrade. I think the thing that has benefited us the most in getting donations is places that have been upgrading to become more green. So they're getting LED technology and getting rid of their incandescent lights or other things that are causing more electricity, and that has helped us. So sometimes keeping your ear to the ground on some of those can also be a really good way of, if your organization isn't wanting to necessarily push to the green, it just kind of depends on where you are in that process too, as well. Oops, I went to the next screen, but so that's kind of where we are anyway. Other thoughts or questions?
I appreciate what you shared with us so far. I definitely, as a theater who just started getting into projections or adding technology into their shows, definitely gave me a better jumping off point.
Oh, that's great.
You know, and I think once theaters start to use projection a little bit more, regardless of the size of your theater, you're going to inspire your members to look at it in different ways. Within our first week of putting up our projections, I had about 5 cast members come up to me and say, "Oh, we're doing this again," or I have an idea where this would work great in a show. So, you know, I really encourage you to find those opportunities to interject this into your performances, even if you're projecting like a window. You know, if you build a physical set, but you can use a rear projection and put a projector backstage and film the outside of a window. You know, and maybe as the day progresses, you change the tone of the color, you know, coming through, or traffic on the streets or something.
There is definitely a lot of place for projections, and even projections and sound effects to create atmosphere or to create time and place. We did a production of Proof, and our sound designer used sort of a surround sound with creating the neighborhood that the house, because it takes the scene takes place in the backyard of this home. And so you're outside the whole time. And so what do we hear outside? And so that surround sound and then adding, you know, if you're adding the layers of the projection in with the sound, creating that time and place can be really something that is really specific. I worked on a production once that it was a science fiction piece. I think I've only worked on one science fiction piece in my whole time. And it had a screen sort of like on Star Trek, where transmissions would come through and things had to be, and I wasn't working with developing those projections, but I was really interested in how something that comes from our culture ended up on stage in a really simple way. It was just one projector, rear screen projection. It was a rear projection screen, much like a shower curtain, but a higher end piece of content. Just really simple, but extremely effective. Extremely effective.
I did want to ask about the projection surfaces. You talked about the shower curtain, which that's more my budget.
Yep.
But can you talk a little bit about other surfaces or what you're using to project on, you know, and things that you can cut and fit into, like the window Jamie was talking about?
Yes, definitely. So you could even take a flat that you have and paint it white or paint it gray, depending on how much bounce you want, because the lighter the surface, the more bounce you're going to get back. So it kind of depends on your atmosphere, and do something in just even with a painted flat. There are products you can purchase like the shower curtain, but rear projection screen over time, I don't know if there's petroleum in the product, and that's why it's become more expensive. When we did She Kills Monsters, we took, you know, those things you see in coolers where you know, like they have at the gas station where they let you walk into the beer cooler and those flaps of plastic are hanging. Not that I do that all the time. I'm just saying that, you know, if you've seen those flaps of plastic. And we projected on plastic of that thickness, and that worked as a projection surface just as well as if it had been projection screen. You want something that has a little bit of opacity if it's plastic. Shooting on a piece of clear plastic, obviously that makes sense. It's just going to go through. And you might get some cool colors on it, but you're not going to get the projection. So it has to have some opacity. But what our scenic designer did is he took 3 colors of spray paint and just stood really far away from the plastic and just spritzed. And it gave us this sort of textured, modeled projection that really worked for the storytelling. If you are building a screen, you could take a fabric like muslin, and you would want to do it like you would do an old-fashioned Hollywood flat, where you stretch and size the muslin so that it is stretched to the nth degree. Because anytime you have a wrinkle in that surface, unless like with the plastic that we had that was kind of floppy, you want to have that look. Any sort of wrinkle or bubble is going to be magnified by that projection. If you're working, yes, go ahead.
So Roscoe actually makes a paint designed for projection.
Yep.
And if you know what size you're looking for, you can actually find a huge variety of screens available. The reason I say this is because, Rhonda, I think your budget's probably pretty close to what mine usually is, which is next to nothing. And we were able to find a very nice quality, edged, grommeted, 120-inch diagonal projection screen. I paid less than $30 a piece for that. And the clarity, and this is a rear projection screen, which is actually more than had I found just a front projection. So, you know, we're talking about 120-inch diagonal, 16:9 aspect ratio front projection screen. I found them for less than $20. So if you think about the amount of cost of material, just muslin alone for that, versus even just a little bit of whatever paint or something that you're going to apply to it, you've already exceeded the cost of just purchasing a screen. And the screens that I found, I simply purchased them, sourced them from Amazon, did a lot of shopping, compared a lot of different products, and it is affordable. My gosh.
That's great. The screen that we have at SVSU has a snap features. Did the ones that you purchased, did they snap onto a frame, or were they just a tension?
So the screens that we purchased, I did see the snap version because I was building a custom frame, and
I see. Okay.
And I'd love to show you a picture if you
yep, I can stop sharing. Yep.
If you were stop sharing, I can bring up an image of it, and that kind of fill in that idea. So there, hopefully you're going to see the 3 screens I built on the stage. I wanted them to look somewhat, lighting truss design. And our screens, I opted for the ones that just had grommets.
Okay.
And they had grommets about every 12 inches. And the screen itself had just a little bit of stretch to it. So we were able to provide, built a frame specifically for those screens, and it provided a bit of a tension to it. So
yeah, because without that tension, your image is going to get distorted. And then did you map to the screens, or how did you deal with your content?
So actually, we did it about as basic as you possibly could. So the outside screens where you see the gentlemen, where they're vertical, basically just did a webcam capture through our camera app, and then using a very similar to the Alt tab toggle that you were using, they could jump and adjust to Jerry's Brain logo that was modified for their screens. And then Heather, who's in the call here, she operated the center screen, which had a few other content things that we put through there, as well as some live video and some other stage stuff. But really, very, very cost effective to jump into something like this. We use very large screens, but if you can imagine finding some secondhand equipment, purchasing some smaller screens, you could be into, streaming for really just maybe a few $100s and sometimes even less. So.
Yeah, and I think now I can see myself. I wasn't seeing myself with my with my PowerPoint up. I think in terms of everyone knows their own theater space the best, and knowing whether it's going to work to be a front projection or a rear projection. They did a play at SVSU prior to my getting there where they couldn't get the lens they needed for a short throw, so they ended up using a mirror, projecting into the mirror, and then the mirror projected onto the screen as a way to minimize the distance between the projector and the screen, to help with that. The Broadway production of American Psycho also did things with mirrors that way for their projections, which is really cool. And I haven't used a mirror in that way. I've seen it done, but it would be just figuring out the angles of and keep your aspect ratio the correct size.
That's a brilliant idea. That's an absolutely brilliant idea.
Yeah, because if you don't have any space, if your screen is here and your projector's here, how are you going to do that? And using the mirror really worked out really well.
Yeah, we were restricted. We ended up having to have our projectors about 12 feet away from our screens, which obviously restricted the amount of space we could use on the stage where our screens were located. I had never even contemplated using a mirror. Yeah, that's genius.
Yeah, it works out. It works out really well as long as you have the geometry right. Because otherwise it ends up kind of looking funhouse. Now, sometimes you want your projections to look kind of funhouse. That could be fun. Could be fun. Yeah. Any other questions or thoughts? What is this? Which are most user friendly? I would say in the video editing. Okay, so I did a little study in the iMovie versus Premiere Pro this year because we filmed 2 of our shows and did a stream of them. And I would say that the iMovie or some of the Movavi products were easier to use, but didn't have as many bells and whistles. Most of them have the same infrastructure. It requires you to put your video in, and then it has little symbols for all the things you can do for the editing. I found iMovie to be the easiest for me, but I think if I had some more time, that Premiere Pro would have been okay. Rhonda, are you a Mac user or a PC user?
Mac.
Mac. Okay, so have you done any video editing in iMovie?
I did, but the iMovie on my iPad, it doesn't have as many options. When I actually tried to do it on my MacBook, I was like, no, thank you.
Well, and the thing that I ended up doing is, and maybe it's the way I learn, is that I went to YouTube and I found some tutorials and I went step by step with what they were doing, and it kind of taught me. And then I had some accidental art that happened as I was making mistakes. So I'm more of a hands-on learner and user. There is, LinkedIn has a learning community that used to be called lynda.com, and LinkedIn purchased lynda.com, and I forget what they call it. It's got a fun name, but if you Googled lynda.com from LinkedIn, it would bring it up. And anything you ever would want to do with any piece of software ever has the most in-depth tutorials on it. It is a subscription service, but I think it is, if you're like, okay, I can handle iMovie on my iPad, but I really need someone to hold my hand on my Mac, I would highly recommend that service, because it's gonna take you through moment by moment. Now, I tried to do the Adobe Premiere Pro tutorials, and they offer you these little packets that you download, and it's got these pictures, and the pictures that I downloaded were different than the one the guy was doing, and he was talking really, really fast, and I just couldn't make that happen. So I think because of the kind of learner I am, that was not the way to be for me. Now, I would say that the Movavi products are similar to the iMovie. What was it, Rhonda, that made you go like this about it?
I couldn't even figure out at first how to download the video I wanted to use. On my iPad, it's already there. So it was, well, and it's on my MacBook too, because I have everything connected. But
yeah,
again, the program on my iPad is a lot simpler.
Yeah.
And I was able to like just drag it over, you know, and my MacBook, which I haven't had an incredibly long time, and not as much experience with it.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I was having a hard time even figuring out how to get the stuff downloaded the way that I wanted it.
Now, the interesting thing I have found with iMovie is that if you Google the exact problem you're having, you can find a 4 or 5 sentence solution for it, the way that the Google works.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to put together some videos for some dancers that I'm working with, just some rehearsal things, and I had to cut out some stuff. And I was frustrated, and I was like, why won't the cursor let me into, I typed in the exact problem I was having, and I got a 4-sentence explanation. Oh, you need to do A, B, C, D. So I will say that there is some strong support. It's just if you have the time. I think that's the hardest thing.
Yeah, I also have a college student that I just paid a lot of tuition for a video class. So I'm like, here, can you do this for mom? Because
right.
But I would really like to learn how to do this more myself, especially with the school stuff. And, we've been like the community theaters and the school program that I work with, we've been recording a lot more things.
Yes. Well, and the thing that I love about all of these video editing products, no matter which one you're using, is you're not destroying your original video. Like when you are in Photoshop, if you don't save correctly, then you can easily ruin your original image. But with these video editing products, you're editing and then exporting. And so the changes happen as you export. So that is at least one good thing about the video editing products that has saved me, because I've cut out the wrong thing or put the same thing in twice by accident, or whatever problem you're having. I think part of my advice, Rhonda, would be to trust yourself a little more, but I don't know if the self-help lifeline.
I will totally Google it. Thank you.
Yes.
I will say though, the Photopea, like I'll second that. Like,
yep.
That I was able to figure, again, that came from my child showing me how to do it. But that program I have used a couple times now for prop making, and that to me was a little easier to catch on to. I really enjoy that program. Yeah,
it's a little more intuitive. And I find Photoshop to me is a little more intuitive, and Photopea is much like Photoshop, more than After Effects is. I open After Effects and go, I have no idea what I'm doing, and I have to go back to the directions and read every time I do it. But I would agree that Photopea is really, really wonderful.
Well, we are right at the 8:30 mark.
Oh, okay.
And do we have any other questions coming in from anyone? Anybody weighing in or did projections of their own that they might want to share?
That they wanted to share. Yeah.
I'll take that as a no.
Okay. I just appreciate that everyone spent their Thursday evening with us with this. It was a beautiful day, a little rainy, but you could have been outside doing your thing, but you came in here and it was great.
Well, I'd like to take this time to thank you so much, Peggy, for sharing your knowledge, your time, as well as those wonderful resources. As she mentioned earlier, we're going to make sure and get a copy, I believe, of your PowerPoint out,
Yeah.
which is going to have all of that that wonderful information there, so that
Yep.
you know,
And
as you guys start working on your stuff, you'll have those resources to go and refer back to.
great. And all the links in the PowerPoint are based on the logos. So if you click on the logo of something, that will take you to their website. And then the handout that I have has just the links. I highly recommend looking at Matt Kaiser's articles and news on projections, his 4-part series about the basics of projections. I think you'll really enjoy that.
Well, thank you so much, guys, and I certainly appreciate everybody for attending the webinar tonight. I do believe that you'll each of you should receive a evaluation once we're all done with the week about how you enjoyed the session or sessions that you've been in, and anything you'd like to see improved, or any subject matter that you'd like to see CTAM present on in the future. I want to remind you we still have one session left tomorrow. Aside from that, I'm so glad you've all joined us here tonight, and I hope you have a wonderful evening. Thanks, everyone.
Good night.
Bye-bye.